Awesome. We're live with Justin Mitchell, the co-founder and CEO of Yak. It's awesome to have you here, Justin.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Well, for those of you who don't know what Yak is yet, it rhymes with Slack, but there's some similarities that we'll dive into. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, Justin, and what you're up to?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like Jonathan said, I'm the founder of Yak. Yak is an asynchronous audio messaging tool for remote teams. That's a mouthful, but what that really means is that we really want to get teams out of meetings, but actually communicating more. One of the biggest things that we saw working with remote teams is that people just think that meetings equal communication. But really, what it is you just need better communication throughout the day instead of carving out hours of time to meet, just like we're talking right now, over video chats. Those can be really draining. They can take a lot of time. They're often very interruptive. And when you have a global workforce of people working across different time zones, they actually totally mess up people's lives. So we're trying to find a better way for people to still get all the benefits of a meeting without actually meeting.
I love it and love your story when I heard it. What surprised me is just your experience working in the technology sector and being remote for the last 15 years. So this is an emerging trend, and maybe not a trend anymore. It's going to
Yeah.
be a permanent feature of work. But would love to dive a little bit deeper into the founding story and how did the act come to be?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, this is kind of an extension of the way that I've worked forever. I've never really gone into an office. I got my first job when I was 16, so I was in high school, and that obviously means that I can't show up for an office at 9 a.m. in the morning. I'm at school at 9 a.m. in the morning, and so you learn to work a certain way when you can't rely on kind of like a 9 to 5 traditional work schedule office environment. And I obviously made it work. My startup loved me, and I still made got my stuff done, still made them happy. I was still moving up in the company, even though I was at high school and unable to ever really show up to the office. And that way of working kind of trickled into different startups that I did. So I had a company that we actually IPO'd, and that company had an office, and I just never really went. It was kind of a like celebrity sighting if I ever showed up at the office. And that's just because, I worked best when I was able to focus and knock stuff out. And, this may come from it may sound like I'm lazy, but at the end of the day, like I don't like work, right? I like what I do, but I don't really call it work. But when you go to an office every day, 9 to 5, and you just sit there in your cubicle or whatever it may have been, that feels like work, right? Like that actually feels like work. And there's something like kind of draining about that. There's something a little bit demoralizing about that. You can't necessarily be with your family. You can't be with your pets. You can't be in an environment that you're comfortable in. And I just found that I could work about 50% less and actually get 50% more done if I was working in like a really focused personal environment. So I just always worked from home or worked from a beach or worked on a vacation. The other day, I worked for like 2 hours in a Target parking lot because I could, and I just was there and it was convenient for me. And I think that way of working means that you have to level up your communication so much. And so I became this kind of like over communicator. And a big part of that over communication is the way you communicate. And so, we found as we were working at our design agency that voice was like the magic way to communicate. But the way that voice worked today was synchronous. You had to get on a call to, go somewhere. And so my co-founder and I at the design agency actually just started using Snapchat to go back and forth. And a lot of times he would just like snap a screenshot or even just like, take a photo of like a wall and then he would talk over it. And maybe even draw with like his finger, annotate some stuff over, a photo and say like, here's what I'm thinking. And it kind of became this magical way to communicate. And Snapchat's obviously not like a work tool. And so we started thinking like, what would it be like if Snapchat for teams existed, right?
Hmm.
This idea of like zero friction, quick back and forth, voice as like a medium for communication. What if that existed? And so Product Hunt had a makers festival. And as a design agency, we were always looking to kind of like create some marketing funnel to get people in and say, oh, wow, these guys know how to build product, right? Yes, I may have IPO'd a startup, but it was a biometric security company. Like no one thinks that's cool. No one knows about this company. It's very like Wall Street and not fun and exciting. So we needed to do something to like get people in the door so we could build their products. And so we built Yelling Across Cubicles, which is what YAC actually stands for this hackathon. And we won the hackathon, and we built it over 4 days. It was Thanksgiving break. Our team is fortunately this fun team that likes to come together and build things because it makes us happy and we get to do something cool. And so we all kind of corralled around this idea, built at the time what was basically like a walkie-talkie app. You clicked a face on your laptop and just your voice blurted out of that person's computer. And we used that app for a really long time. And it was neat because it was a way for us to speak very quickly without spinning up a Zoom meeting, without scheduling a call, without impacting somebody's calendar. And I don't know about you, but like for me, there's kind of like a level of stress that comes from looking at my calendar. Like I literally woke up this morning and I was like, what's on my agenda today? I'm like, I have this podcast. I have a meeting before that podcast. Yeah, I'm just going to cancel that meeting. Right. I was like, I don't want to do another meeting and then hop into a podcast. Like it doesn't sound fun. So I just canceled it. Right. There's like a level of stress that calendars cause. And so we wanted to get around that. But what we found with the first version of YAC was that the fact that it wasn't planned, but it was real time, actually made it even more anxiety inducing because you never knew when someone's audio was going to come screaming out of your speakers. And that would happen on actual planned meetings and calls with VCs because I was raising venture at that time. And we had this kind of like light bulb moment of like, why does it need to be real time? Like, why do we both need to be available at the exact same time? The Snapchat proof of, work demo that I did with Hunter, like that was never real time. That was always back and forth asynchronously. And so we changed the whole app to recorded audio messages instead of real time audio. And kind of the rest is history. That's really where we've, made the entire experience this new way of working.
And in terms of, I've used the product. That's actually how we got this meeting on the books. I love how you promote it, via your LinkedIn, anywhere. You're like, hey, you want to get in touch? Just send me a YAC. Today, looking at the market, there's been this boom in audio. You have things like Clubhouse, podcasting has really hit the mainstream. Are people using the product today mostly from the perspective of listening to these audio messages, or you guys have a really strong transcription feature built within the product?
Yeah.
Are people reading it, or does it really depend on your style?
I'd say that it's a little bit of both, but I would also say that maybe it's being abused in a way that it wasn't originally meant to. But, transcription, it's a level up, right? Like it allows you to search for something, which audio is like inherently very difficult to find historical context in because you can't search it like you can a Slack message. And so transcription enables something like that. It enables tagging and topics. And we have a machine learning algorithm on the back end that actually will pull out things like topics and sentiment analysis, and it'll do summarization of things over, transcription. So there's a lot you can do with transcription. But one thing that's actually neat that it does is it levels the playing ground across, well, I'm not in a position where I can listen to audio, but I can at least read this transcription because, it's loud here or whatever it might be. I'm in a church, there's some place where I cannot listen to audio. But what I actually find that's really useful is kind of like that eye level skim moment where like a new message comes in and I see my name or I see a keyword and I go, okay, that's important to listen to. Or I'm focused, I'm heads down, like I'm going to ignore that and move on. And there's something that your brain does that's very interesting between like a Slack message and a YAC message is that with YAC, you can skim that and you can just decide if it's important or not because you're not really going to read the whole thing, but you can just read a little bit of it. With a Slack message, you pretty much read the whole thing and then you get distracted and you slide over to Slack, you start typing, and now you're in a conversation and you're going back and forth and you're no longer coding or designing or whatever you were supposed to be doing. And with YAC, it was always meant that the transcription would just show you a couple of lines so that you could get an idea of like, is this a red alert and I should stop everything and look at this? Or are they just giving me a quick update and I can just listen to that message later? So, we don't want you reading, quote unquote, the transcription. We really want you listening because there's something magical that happens in a remote team where you actually hear your coworker's voice on a daily basis. And there's this isolation problem that remote causes where you just don't really feel connected to your coworkers anymore. YAC is fixing that just purely by passively listening to everybody, every day. So we want you listening to that message. The transcription is there to kind of ease you into voice
Mm.
messaging as well as provide these kind of like level up features.
Yeah, and uh, I guess diving a little bit deeper into how people are using the product today, and even thinking about like markets and opportunities as a founder, as an entrepreneur. You know, your messages has voice messages. Your Slack has audio notes. So how did you think, as you were jumping into this opportunity, which it seems like it was almost semi by accident, thinking about the product being a full-fledged platform, whether or really more of a feature
Right.
within another bigger platform, and then convincing people to give you money to then build this out as it could.
I mean, it was definitely a thing that VCs said all the time. Is like, you guys are just a feature. And the biggest thing that we said to that was lots of apps have this as a feature and no one's using the feature. And that's
Mm,
not because the feature sucks. It's because it is a like sidelined feature. It's not a dedicated audio experience. I mean, I guess Clubhouse is like a great example of how you take a Discord room and add hand raising and, like scheduled calendar links and like all this stuff that's like really specific to that one feature that Discord's had for many, many years, right? It's basically the exact same concept, but they really honed in on the experience of what it's like to do a scheduled broadcast style room. And, part of Yak has always been this like, we get a question a lot, like, are you going to add text? Why don't you just add text so that I can just like respond back with text? Well, because most of the time you would just respond back with text. And we don't want that. We want you to use your voice. And there's a part of like Skype and Teams and all these different like companies that have had voice messages for a while where I would send a voice message to somebody and I would see them reply back with text. And it is the more convenient way to communicate. But in remote work, convenience is already the name of the game, right? Like you already have so much convenience in your life just by being able to roll out of bed and work from a couch. There are things that you, as a worker, as a team, as a lead, whatever it might be, you really have to work purposely towards. And that's communication. Like communication just has to be so purposeful in remote work. It cannot be this very lazy thing. And so we really feel strongly that voice is the way to have better communication. It's higher bandwidth. I can get more out in a shorter amount of time. I can speak 7 times faster than I can type something. And it's richer in context. It has tone. It has emotion, right? And you're getting that personal connection. That's something that text just can't give. But on top of that, like you can do it very quickly and while you're walking, while you're in the car, right? There's all these different ways that you can communicate. So we're encouraging people to use this better form of communication. And so when you shove this feature into another app, they just fall back to kind of the
mm.
easy, lazy Gen Z millennial way of texting and typing that we all do, because that's the easier thing to do. So yeah, I mean, we got the comment a lot, and it was something that I took to heart, which meant that the next VC that I talk to, I need to have enough background on why this isn't a feature so that they go, oh, okay, I see that this is a full-fledged platform of its own. And, a lot of that had to do with one thing just being like public share links, right? I can create audio in Yak. I can right click, get a shareable link, and I can put that on Twitter. I can put that into an email. I can share that into a Slack. So it's this way of like getting audio to other places that Yak enables. There's this idea of taking audio and putting it into like a Asana task. Or the other day, I had some
Mm.
very complex stuff that we put into our linear task management system. And I recorded a Yak for each of them, dropped it into the task and said, here's how I want it done. So it was very, very specific, how I wanted it done. You couldn't have misunderstood what I typed because I was, using short form or something like that. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot more that takes Yak out of just a feature and makes it its own full-fledged platform. But a lot of it is really based on this concept of purposeful communication.
Yeah, I love that. It's taking what is at its core and then building around it. And I even recognized that when I was using it with you, it pushed me to be more creative. Instead of sending over a doc, I
Right.
sent you over a screenshot of the
Screenshot. Yeah.
doc and then spoke over it.
Yes,
Or
and that
I,
context was so cool. We talk a lot about this content plus context with Yak. This idea that like you're showing something, but then you actually are also explaining why you're showing that, and that's kind of the important thing that gets missed a lot in remote work. Is again laziness. Somebody just pastes a link to a Google Doc into a chat or an email and says like, "Here, look at this." and then you're like, I don't know what I'm looking at. Like, what is this doc? I have no context, right? So Yak kind of forces that style of communication where it pushes the other person to say, all right, I'm going to talk over this now so that you know why I'm talking about it.
Yeah, and for me also, outside of Yak, really excited about audio in the form of other tools that have been recording my voice and transcribing it. So another tool I've used, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, just raised a big round of VC funding, is Otter.ai. I got into the product because I used it for voice journaling. So instead of like being on my computer or something or a notepad and losing this sort of conversation with myself, I'd go on long walks, get my thoughts out into the ether, and it would transcribe it. So just in case I needed to search anything, and it was sort of like free talk therapy for me. And then the evolution of that was using it for sales calls. And then the evolution of that is also using it for investor calls. So we can recognize where we can iterate and improve the narrative. Went from myself to now with the outside world. So I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg, and there's going to be so much more that we unlock with audio. If you think of like even interactive audio, now that we have these AirPods in our ears, tapping them, doing like a game show and going on walks, listening, and then raising your hand by actually touching your AirPods rather than having to engage back with your phone. And when we were going back and forth, we spoke a little bit about audio for wellness, this idea of Zoom fatigue. We're on our computers all day in distributed environment, and really creating other opportunities to be more efficient and more effective through voice. Can you riff a little bit on that and how you see Yak as a tool for employee well-being?
So I had a VC reach out to me over Yak, just a cold Yak. That'll be a phrase in the future. And he said, I love that you're positioning your product as a mental health solution. And I went, huh, I don't know where you got that from. Like, our website doesn't say that. Like, our tweets don't say that. And he goes, no. Like, I follow you personally on Twitter, and that's how you push your product. I was like, oh no, that's 100% accurate then. Yeah, like I definitely push it that way. And it was cool for me to hear him say that, because it proved that, I guess, this wasn't like a personal thing to me, that people were able to understand from the way that I talk about my own product, that I do view it as like a solution to mental health. And there's so much to unpack there. But one of the biggest ones, and I talked about this, earlier, is just isolation, right? Just hearing other people's voices. It's like the number one thing that people, if you do a survey of remote work and like, what was it like moving out of the office? And like, oh, I miss people, right? Like, we don't really miss people at Yak or So Friendly or whatever company I've ever worked for, because we always found a way to communicate very often and about things that weren't even work related. And a big part of that was doing it over voice. And, a lot of that solution meant that I didn't want to like over inundate people with Zoom calls and meetings to get that isolation fixed. And so asynchronous voice messages like offers a way for you to record your voice, send it off on your own time, not interrupt somebody, and still get that kind of isolation fix. And if you kind of like drill down further into that, there's just what I just talked about, not interrupting someone, right? There is a mental side to constantly being interrupted. Developers talk about it all the time, like being sidetracked and having to work on something new and being pulled out of what they're doing, because there's a golden rule of like, if you can't work for 2 to 3 hours uninterrupted writing code and you get interrupted, whatever you just did, you basically have to throw away, because there's just no way that you can like get into the flow again and understand what you were doing. And so there's rules around like how you don't interrupt your coworkers. And so there's a lot of frustration that can come from, coders in particular, who are constantly being pulled out of what they're doing to hop into a meeting. And you take that one step further and we start talking about just like the global workforce and time zones. And you've got people that need to wake up at a different time, have to take their kid to school, they go to sleep at a different time. You can't pull that person out at 2 a.m. in the morning to go hop on a daily stand-up call. Like, that's just rude. It's interrupting their lifestyle. It's going to hurt their personal family life, right? So there's so much like mental health that literally just goes into the process of respecting someone else's time. And you can really only do that with an async platform. Now we get into what we call Zoom fatigue, right? Which is just like for some reason, I don't really know why, but for some reason, everyone decided that like you could never call people on the phone. It always had to be like a scheduled video call. And I don't know if that came from the like I miss people thing. And so I need to see people's faces. The interesting thing, I guess, on my end is I see people's faces. Maybe they're not the people that I work with, but like I do still see people's faces. I think maybe there's a subset of people who had really bad quarantines for this last, year where they just were by themselves for a very extended period of time. And that's not work from home, right? That's not remote work. Like that's quarantine. And it sucks. And it has nothing to do with, a remote work environment. But one thing that I've never quite understood is why we all defaulted to what I feel like is being on a stage, right? Like I'm on a stage with you right now. And I like that. I like being on a stage. My designer, Raina, does not like that, right? Like she's a brilliant designer, but she does not want to be on camera in front of everyone being asked to speak. It's just not something that's her personality. And like, I need to respect that as a team lead and asking all of these people, everybody turn on your cameras, give me your stand up, let's do it, is really unfair to a lot of different personality types. They don't want to be on stage. They don't want to be on video. And so again, async solves this problem of like, I get to do my stand up when I feel comfortable, when I've thought through it. I'm not being like randomly put on the spot. We've got 2 foster kids now, and I can tell you Caden's like least favorite thing in the entire world is being put on the spot in class for like spot reading. Like he absolutely hates it when the teacher's like, all right, it's your turn. Read that first paragraph. He like freezes up, right? That happens a lot to remote workers, right? This idea of like, what's your stand up? What's the update? And you're like, oh gosh, I didn't realize I didn't prepare yet. I wasn't ready. And async solves that. So you've got that piece, which is just like, why did everybody need to be on a stage to be able to talk to their team? That's a ridiculous requirement to require everyone to speak on demand, on video, in their home environment. For one thing, it's kind of an invasion of privacy anyway. Not everybody can have like a dedicated space like this. But then we also take that again one step further and start talking about just Zoom fatigue as a biological thing that happens, right? You're on video all the time. Before we hopped on here, I told you I had to go do my hair, right? Because I wanted to look good.
Right? It looks great.
I'm just saying, I knew my hair was flopping down. I had just showered, so I wanted to go put some spray in it. And not everyone's like that. And it's unfair to ask everybody to always look good. There's a ton of really cool studies right now just about biological contact, just like my eyes to you. So I have, and this is a trick that I do, is I have my window really, really short right now so that I can put your little video window as close to my camera as possible so that I can try to feel like I'm naturally looking at you and know that my eyes are like not in a different location on the screen. That's just something that I do so that I don't feel like I'm looking at something in a different orientation. But there's something actual biological that happens when you're on a video call and your brain is trying to trick you into thinking that you're actually talking to a human right now. Because you're not. You're talking to a glass LCD, right? And those eyes are not 3D, they're flat. And there's something very draining about doing that day after hour after hour. So, all those things combined, you've got kind of like this recipe for disaster, this need to perform constantly in your personal space, look good while you're on camera, get interrupted all the time so that you can look good on camera. And then this idea that this is like a good way to actually bond, because it's not, it's weird. It's separated by glass and it doesn't feel natural. And you do this 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and it's draining. It sucks. People hate it. And you see it, right? Like you start to see like the curve of like tweets where people are like, oh my gosh, another day of Zoom calls. And I think it goes back to kind of my original mission of like, I don't like to work. I want to actually work less. And Zoom calls, because they're typically like scheduled, it's an hour long a lot of times, is work you can't optimize for, right? Like I can't make that clock go any faster. At least with a yak, if you send me like a long yak, I can put that baby on 2x and I can be driving down the road listening to you, right? Like I'm speeding up my work. My productivity is increasing. You can't speed up a real-time Zoom. There's no way to make this faster. So yeah, there's just so much to unpack there that really helps async behavior, whether it's yak or anything else, but just async behavior in general, really work over that kind of synchronous fatigue that happens just by the fact that you can't control your own time anymore.
Yeah, there's so many places I want to jump on from there. As you're doing that, I closed my browser just so I could be a little bit better with my eyes. I think there's some weird part of this whole Zoom thing that we're like constantly looking in the mirror too. Like
Yeah.
we're constantly looking at ourselves unless you hide the self view,
Yep.
which I started to do because I'm like, I don't need to look at myself all day. I already know I'm in the camera.
Yep.
It's a little bit weird. And then, overall, just overnight, everything became a video call. It was really bizarre. And I liked it. I like being similar to you. I think, being on stage, performing. Sometimes even when the other person's camera is off and I'm selling something, I'd like to be in front of the camera so I can explain, use my hands, etc.
Absolutely.
But that doesn't mean every call needs to be a video call. So I've even started to just throw my cell phone number into the meetings link and be like, hey, just give me a call. Maybe I'll take a walk, get outside, get some sun in the face, etc. But just to push back a little bit and just hear your perspective in terms of like someone being in front of a camera versus, something like voice, and then thinking about like text over voice. Doesn't Yak sometimes push people who would be uncomfortable even using their voice to have to now use their voice? Is there something around, like, how do you think about solving for that? Or is it more just like putting someone in the hot spot, getting them to own their voice and empower them? And eventually that will pay off for them in the long run. How do you think about that?
So there's a couple cool things that happen that only happen when you're using something like Yak, where it's async voice. One is that you get the option to edit yourself, right? So if you start to stumble on your words and you think you sound stupid, you can just cancel and start over, right? You can't do that with live audio. When you have to recover in real time when it's live, and that's something that async provides. It's just the ability to be like, that was dumb, let me start over. One of the other cool things that happens is what we call rubber duck debugging, which is where you get to talk to yourself. You're not actually talking to anybody yet when you're recording a Yak, right? Like you might see my face on the screen because you're recording to me, but really I'm not there. You're kind of just speaking to your phone. And so there's this cool moment that happens where you vocalize whatever you're thinking about out loud for the first time, and you get to hear yourself and maybe even hear the problem you're talking about from a different perspective. And so there's this nice introspective opportunity that happens for a lot of people where sometimes they might even not even need to send the Yak, but they spoke out loud and they went, oh, never mind, I got it. Like, I actually don't even need Justin's help anymore. Like, just talking about it
I love
helped
that.
me work through that. And we hear that a lot. Like, I'll get Yaks from my designer, Heather, all the time that it's like 2 minutes. And at the end, she goes, never mind, I just needed to talk it out. I don't need you anymore. And then ends the Yak, right? And I'm like, cool. Like, I like that. Like, I like hearing that. If we're going to talk like specifically around, I guess, uncomfortableness in speaking,
I
I
like to
think
say
that
fun comfort.
uncomfort.
Yeah.
It it changes things a little bit because it's async, because you're not performing for anyone and you can edit yourself. But I would say that I push a little bit on the side of like, you talk in your everyday life, right? Like you speak to humans. You're not like completely censoring yourself, even if you're very shy, which a lot of our team members are. Like you still speak to other people at the grocery store or the Wendy's drive-through, your family in your house. Like you still have to use your voice at some point. And so we're really big on this idea of kind of empowerment of like, we want you to have a voice and you should be able to have that voice whenever you're comfortable, which is very different from, hey, let's all have a meeting about a subject. Does anybody disagree? Nope. No one disagrees. All right. That's the way it's going to be. Right. And there's that person sitting in the back of the meeting going like, I disagree, but I'm not ready to say anything yet. Right. But they just didn't want to speak up. Yak at least allows them to have that moment of like, let me think about what I'm going to say. Let me process the information. Okay, now I feel comfortable speaking, which you just don't get with live conversation. We're constantly thinking about just in general inclusivity, and that inclusivity, it's very broad. It ranges between humans, right, that just want to speak or don't want to speak, or feel comfortable, don't feel comfortable, right? Like your personality, right? It ranges between just like ability, right? Maybe you're uncomfortable in that language. We have a guy from Venezuela who's told us like his mission for this year is to like really get better at English. Now, I don't necessarily have a problem listening to any of his yaks. Like I understand everything he's saying, but he feels like there is a like he feels uncomfortable, embarrassed by his level of English. And so he's told us that. And so one thing that we want to eventually get to is the fact that he could speak fully in Spanish and we could translate that into English. And then we could actually speak his yak out in English in his voice, which is some really magic AI stuff that we're working on. There's some really great companies that are doing artificial voices that are based off of real voices. And it's magical. It's really, really cool stuff. And then take that even further, and you've got someone who truly doesn't feel comfortable speaking at the time. Or actually today, one of our designers is sick and just said, hey, I can't yak, like my voice is not working. Where you actually type, and then that gets converted into voice, and that voice actually comes across. So I can hear my designer's voice, even though she didn't necessarily speak that time. So there's a lot of ways that we're like thinking of how do you move forward voice in a fully inclusive way. And of course, also time zones are inclusive, right? The ability to let anybody have their feedback, have their input, and not necessarily be awake at the time that you guys are talking about it. And so there's a lot of inclusivity that happens with async voice. And so we're pushing those boundaries for sure. But at the same time, to kind of answer your original question, we would say, yes, like push yourself to speak in that moment, because we give you the option of canceling it, doing it at a different time, doing it later, deciding what you want to say and what you don't want to say, those type of things. But we do want you to talk because we want to like bond with your voice and we want to hear that version of you.
I love hearing your voice, Justin.
Thank you.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit because I listened to you on another podcast. I was like, okay, this guy has a great voice. He's obviously an awesome communicator. It really ties into the story. Fun to listen to. Curious to learn a little bit more, or if you're willing to share a little bit more about like what got you even passionate about the voice or this showmanship or, leading a company. Maybe we could dive a little bit into your background as a creative, and then zoom in a little bit more as to, the lessons, the skills that you've developed as an entrepreneur and founder over time.
Yeah, definitely. Well, at a base level, I really don't like authority. So I've just never really worked well when someone was my boss. And so that just meant I had to go be my own boss. And so I've really always had that kind of style. Growing up when I was a kid, I'd want a toy and my dad would say, cool, go buy it. Well, I don't have money. He's like, okay, go figure it out. Like knock on a neighbor's door and mow the lawn or something, right? Like you can get money, just go figure it out. And that kickstarted this idea of like, I guess, self-empowerment, this idea of like, well, I'm going to go get what I want and I'm going to figure out a way to get there. And, a lot of, I guess, my entrepreneurial journey is that idea of like, something doesn't exist, I want to make it exist, or I want something and I don't have it yet, so I'm just going to go figure out how to get it. So, I mean, half the stuff that I've built or, created over the years were things that I just like wanted for my own use. We made an app like a week or two ago that lets you take your like 2-factor authentication codes from iMessage that in Safari, it like autofills on your Mac. But if you use Chrome, you just don't get that cool feature. So we built it so that you could get it inside of Chrome, and it's available. And I haven't even marketed it because I'm very happy that I have it on my own computer. Like it's one of those things that like I wanted to use, so I built it. And so a lot of like the creation of Yak is this idea of like, I'm already talking like this, but we're abusing a platform like Snapchat, which is not like where I want to have my work friends. So like, let's just build our own version of that. And so, a lot of what we've done over the years has been things that we thought should exist that didn't, and we just made them on our own. I talked about this a lot on Jason's podcast, but, a lot of my origin as kind of a good entrepreneur, I guess, or skilled in raising money and selling solutions as a design agency, whatever it might be, comes from my desire to be an actor. I like being on stage. I said that earlier. And, I enjoy it. It's fun for me. I like the, you never know what's going to come next type of style of like thinking on your feet. And, I'm good at sales and excel on like a VC high stress phone call or video call because I'm very, very good at improv. And that improv came from my drama teacher in high school, just teaching me how to go up on stage and talk for 5 minutes about something I knew absolutely nothing about. And I enjoy it. It's fun for me. It's like a good stress. Is a good stress, is that a thing? I think it's probably a
Yeah, I
thing, but
think that's what I was saying before. Is like I call it getting fun comfortable.
yeah, okay.
It kind of feels, it feels the discomfort actually is a little bit exhilarating and fun, and
Exciting.
it's like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So like I enjoy that fun comfortability, and it I don't know, it helps me think about new ways of thinking about things, to be honest. Like a lot of the no's that we got from VCs were just basically like writing prompts, right? When someone says no, it was just like, okay, well, how do I get around this the next time, right? Like
yeah,
that's a blocker, but I don't ever want to face that wall again. So, in the future, I'm going to have a slide that answers that exact question, or I will have like a section on our website that talks about this specific thing. And, having that kind of background in improv makes a lot of those calls easy for me, but also a fun little challenge. Like it's exciting to have someone ask you questions that you maybe have never heard before, or throw a curveball in there. You say, oh, well, I don't know. That's interesting. Let me think about that for a second. I think that that's a big part of the entrepreneurial journey, as well as you never know what the market is going to throw at you. You never know what competitors might pop up. You never know what Apple might block or decide not to allow in their app store. So you have all these different factors that can affect your journey as a startup founder. And, you improv in life, right? Like features get improved, which platforms you release on get improved, right? So, you see this kind of like ideation in the space. Like I love that the Twitter Spaces team is just like tweeting out all of their like design ideas and concepts, and you can tell that they're kind of just every day on their toes thinking, which way is Clubhouse going? Where are these other apps going? Where are we going? Where's the market shifting? And that's kind of the story of a startup, right? Is that
yeah.
you're just constantly, bobbing and weaving through different opportunities. And I'm obviously good at that on a stage, but it's fun to also do it off stage too, and just start to have that pulse on the market, understand where things are coming from and how you need to react to them.
Something I've been curious about is when that skill or those set of skills is inherent to the entrepreneur, or when has it been something that has been developed and honed in on over a period of time. And I think more specifically, if you can think to any lower points in your life, in your journey, that has served as inflection points or times where you had to make this switch. Can you speak to any of that?
I mean, I can tell you that there was definitely a huge switch that happened with my first startup. So, success story. We IPO'd, we're on the NASDAQ. That's a huge story. Dude, no one bought our product. It sucked. Like everyone hated that product. And a big part of why So Friendly existed, and even the name So Friendly existed, was because I wanted to start building things that humans wanted and not things that like came out of R&D efforts.
Mm.
And there was a big lesson learned when we spent like 2 years working on a consumer product, and then we put it in front of somebody for the first time, and they're like, yeah, that's not really something that I'm interested in, and those features are not really that exciting to me. I know they're exciting to you, but they're not exciting to me. And so, I had this kind of like huge gotcha moment where I was like, we totally built this thing heads down for like stuff that we thought was really neat and cool, that was very nerdy and like technically very impressive. Like one of my favorite stories is like we got the battery life on our hardware down to a year, 1 year between recharge. There's a rechargeable battery, not a replaceable one, rechargeable, and it lasted a year. We were cleaning out my drawers the other day and found one of these devices, and it powered on with 50% battery left. It's been sitting there for like 4 years, and it powered on with 50% battery left on it. And I'm just like, what a ridiculous thing we achieved. Like, that's so technically cool, but no one cares about that. Everyone would be very glad to charge their device every day, every 7 days, whatever it is. Like, no one needs a year-long battery life. It's just not something people are asking for. But we felt really cool about it. And then when we showed it to everybody, they were like, yeah, that's great. I have to charge my phone every night, man. Like, it's just not something that I care about. So, I think that there's a level of improv, or, that bob and weave that I talked about, that you just might not do when you think that you're very, like when you're very confident in whatever you're building and you've never actually done the research to find out if anybody cares about what you're building. And so a big part of like what we've been doing at Yak is like we're just very, 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 very public about everything we do. A new feature comes out, we tweet about it. We're thinking about a new feature, we tweet about it. We released a new feature and just like didn't say anything about it, just never announced it, and just put it out there and just watched to see if people naturally found it in the app, and then waited for the reactions to roll in to see if people were interested in it. So we're constantly doing these things that are like public pushes of like, please give us feedback on this because I want to know if I'm going to work on it anymore. I mean, really, the hackathon project of Yak was like, let's put 4 days of effort into this. Let's put it out there.
Oh,
if people are interested in it, we can put some more time into it. But I'm not going to like quit my job and start a startup if no one wants this thing. Then a bunch of people wanted this thing, and then we got VC backing, and we, really spun it out. But that first effort was this little like lob over the fence, and let's see if people react well to it. So, I think that sometimes that thinking on your feet and the ability to like react quickly is inherent and is something that's like a personality trait. But I think sometimes entrepreneurs just get into their head way too much, and even in a VC call do the same thing, right? They say the same pitch to the same VC every single time, regardless of what that VC is backing, what they're interested in. Like beforehand, I would typically look at a firm's website, look at a couple of their portfolio companies, and understand if they're backing people with good branding, people with lots of customers, people with like enterprise customers, if they backed someone for the purpose of AI, or if they backed somebody for the purpose of the app that uses the AI, so that I would kind of like gear my pitch around their investment thesis. The other thing that I would do a lot, and I talked about this on Jason's podcast, was just like, I gave them the opportunity to speak first so that they could tell me what their investment thesis is, so that when I got to speak, I could kind of like speak around what they wanted to hear, instead of, again, giving them just like a generic pitch and hoping that it hits them in the right spaces. So some of it's taught, some of it's inherent, but I think every entrepreneur can be guilty of being too heads down, too in their own space, whether or not it's a skill they have or not. I think especially when you are a founder type, sometimes you typically are there's a lot of hubris in founders, right? Like, we think what we're doing is great. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it. And sometimes you need to be knocked down a peg and told that, like, no, this isn't working. You need to figure out a different way of doing it.
Yeah, I could really resonate with your story. We spent a year plus maybe on the first product that we've ever put out, which was a digital bank with a rewards debit card that would incentivize healthy living, give you cashback rewards when you spent on wellness. And when we took it to market, it was somewhat, there were crickets. We grew the community to 500 cardholders, but there were so many points of friction throughout the experience where we had to zoom out and say, okay, is this really what we were here to build? Do we really just think this cool, or is this what the market wants? So love that. Justin, I feel like I can talk to you for another couple hours, but want to be totally respectful of your time. The last thing I'm going to ask you, you said you want to work less. And I think that idea is now also hitting the mainstream. You had, books like Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week, maybe 10 years ago now, talking about like really balancing life and work, going and working on a beach, etc. What do you like to do with your time when you're not working, just to maybe humanize the conversation a little bit too?
Oh man, this is not going to humanize the conversation. I just like to work on other stuff. I have lots of like little side projects going. Like I said earlier, I've got 2 foster kids, so I'm working on a device that lets them like earn tokens and stuff for good behavior, good grades, and then redeem those tokens for things like Lego sets or Pokemon card packs, different things that they want. And again, I like to work less. So it's really a device that helps my laziness, is I don't want to have to manually go give them these tokens. So I'm building like a vending machine that will do it for me so that I don't have to be involved in the transaction. But like, that's one thing that I'm working on. It's called butter behavior. The whole idea just being like they get to self-police their own kind of like good grades, good behavior check-ins. So that's something I'm working on. But I like doing little side projects here. I'm always experimenting. I do play video games. I love audiobooks. I used to read a book a night when I was a kid. Like literally, like I would just blow through the whole book. I'm really, really fast at reading. And it's funny because, and this is such a tangent, but like I was actually the worst reader in my entire school. I actually was behind everyone. And then like one summer, my mom did Hooked on Phonics with me. And then that summer, I read 20,000 pages and won like an award for summer reading because I read the entire Hardy Boys collection in one summer, like every book. And so I love reading, but I don't have as much time anymore. So now I do audiobooks because that's like an easy way for me to consume stuff. But I love tinkering. Like that's my main thing is like throwing up a website with a brand, seeing how people react to it, and then deciding if it's something that I want to invest some time in. So I work a lot, but it's not, I think that's the distinction I was trying to make earlier, right? Is like, I don't like to feel like it's work. I like it to be so easy and so like fun. I don't feel like I'm working. And like Zoom calls a lot of time feel like time I can't control. And that feels like work, right? Same thing with like doing presentations and filling out spreadsheets. There's things that I don't like doing. And that's fine. There's lots of people that like doing that type of stuff. And so actually probably my largest work hack that I talk about a lot is just finding people to do the things you don't want to do, right? Like it's like a number one rule. Like I'm really bad at numbers. I hate finance stuff. Jordan, my co-founder, really good with it, right? And he like likes doing that type of calculation. All right, you take care of all of that, buddy. I don't want to get anyone near it. You just tell me the numbers at the end of the day, make sure we're doing good, and I'll be very happy. So, you know, there's a lot of effort on my end that goes into ensuring I have less effort throughout the day. And that has to do with buying a good laptop that just like runs fast and you don't have to worry about choking on speed. It's invest the money, put $3,000 into a better laptop so that you don't have to work as hard. You know, little apps here and there that like level up your productivity, executive assistants and scheduling tools and good email experience, different things that you can buy and use and leverage, just basically make your day less work. So, you know, I love what I think most people typically think of work, which would be like designing a product, coding, you know, building a website, designing a logo. I like that stuff. I don't like all the other stuff. And so I'm constantly finding ways to like cut down on all the things that I look at as work.
Yeah, it sounds like you love building shit. You love problem solving, and it's a form of to bring in, you know, your background in acting and improv. It's a form of art for you to kind of be
absolutely creating,
yeah.
right? Like just seeing something and making it happen.
I love it. Justin, definitely want to do another part 2 of this with you. It's been so fun. Where can people learn more about you and Yak?
Yeah, so yak.com, YAC, yak.com. We got that nice 3-letter domain. At Yak on Twitter as well. And then the best way to connect with me, just like you said at the top of the call, yak.com/jmitch. That's my Yak URL. You can add me directly there. I'm also jmitch on Twitter, which I'm very active on. So please hit me up if you have questions, if you know, are building a startup and just want to like run it by me and see if I have any feedback. Like I'm always available for kind of like free advice, as long as we do it asynchronously, because I don't like hopping on calls. But yeah, hit me up anytime.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. It's been so much fun.
Thanks for having me.